Did not want to forget the most important part. Let's go! What's up, guys? Welcome back. I think today is the day we finally drive the 700 with the 1600 dual port in it. A couple episodes ago, you saw me get this motor in the car and actually get it running. So we heard it run. It sounds good. It's had a couple intermittent idling issues here and there, but I haven't driven it yet because my throttle cable is too short. Now, since this 700 is down on a beetle pan that my father and I shortened by over a foot, the throttle cable was far too long by the time we got to that point in the project. So I trimmed it to fit the carburetor with the shorter body, basically, the shorter pan. When I put the dual port motor in, for some reason, this carburetor, and it might have something to do with the dual port manifold, the carburetor sits back further in this motor than the carburetor did in the 1500 that was in here before. So my throttle cable is literally like 1.5 to 2 inches too short to reach the carburetor. So I need a whole new throttle cable. So that's hung me up. And when I got to that point, we left for Florida for Eurotripper, so I didn't get a chance to actually put this thing together enough to drive it before we left for Florida and before the episode of that trip went up. But last night, my friend Sam, who lives right here in Chattanooga, swung by and dropped off a throttle cable that'll fit this pan. This pan is a 1969 pan, so hopefully this is the correct throttle cable. It looks like it. Everything looks right. The end there, everything looks as it should. The only thing I'll need to do is trim this one because it'll stick out by another foot or however far we shorten down that pan. Today's episode should hopefully be an easy one, knock on wood, because we know nothing goes to plan half the time. But I'm going to get this old throttle cable out, get the new throttle cable in. All right, so this might be a little tricky to do on the lift since I can't get the door open too far. But the throttle cable comes in right here, and since this end did not break, I got to pull it back out from this side since there's a hook on the end of this cable that attaches to the actual arm that your throttle cable pushes on. So, gonna pull it out from here and fish the new one in the same way to the back. Make sure everything lines up through all the tubes that it goes through once it gets beyond the fixed tube in the tunnel. It goes to another sleeve and then another housing that goes through the fan shroud. I'm unhooking the J hook here at the end of the cable. You guys will be able to see this a little better once I get it out. All right, got that out. Now I'm going to fish the cable out. Well, it's still greased up. That's good. All right, so here's the new cable, and this is an uncut full Volkswagen Beetle cable. And if you haven't seen one before, this end here is what reaches to the back at the carburetor, and the actual set screw in the throttle linkage at the carburetor pinches against that, and that's a little bit more reinforced than the cable itself. And the other end here meets at the throttle pedal, at the actual accelerator pedal. And it's got like an S hook, J hook kind of end to it. And this fits through a hole and then kind of locks into place. So when you press on the accelerator pedal, this pulls and doesn't come out. So what you'll want to do is, if you're replacing your cable, you want to make sure you put like a thin layer of grease on this cable. That way it doesn't run dry inside its housing and ultimately fray and break somewhere inside its housings. So the new cable is all greased. Now we're going to try to feed it through. I've hit something in the back. So let's go to the back here. We'll go to the rear of the car and we'll figure out where exactly the cable is. Well, I think I got pretty lucky because that's the cable right there. And now we're at the tin work where all I have to do is pass it through the tube that passes through the actual fan shroud to the carburetor. So I don't think we got to get the thing up in the air. Now I just gotta line it up to the tube. We are in. All right, so you can see here how it hooks in. Just a little J-hook goes through a hole right there. And then the tension on the carburetor pulls this back and your throttle cable sits against it, or your throttle pedal rather. And then as you push, obviously it pulls the linkage on the carburetor and you accelerate. All right, so what I didn't mention before as to why I trimmed the throttle cable so short on the 1500 was I was using one of these shortened cable like housings. And what this does is this allows you to put the cable, your shortened cable, in the end of this. And then there's an Allen set screw that tightens against the cable. And this bar end of this adapter slides through the actual set screw on the carburetor linkage. So you're actually pressing against the rod itself on the set screw on the carburetor linkage. All right, well, this is the amount of cable that I took out of the stock cable, and it is right around a foot long, and that's about how much we took out of the pan. All right, guys, well, I think we're ready to prime it and crank it up. So fingers crossed, we can take this thing for a drive. Well, as you probably saw in that clip before I did, I had a massive fuel leak when I started this car. And it turns out the fuel line from the pump up to the carburetor wasn't tight enough, and it was just geysering out of there. I'm gonna get some speedy dry down, clean this up. I tightened up that line and tried starting it again, and it's not leaking, but that was an oversight. I tightened it down, but clearly not enough. So it's not running that well. It's starting real well, so I think the timing's okay. So I pulled the plugs, which I should have done before I put the motor in, because cylinders 3 and 4 are really hard to get to you with the battery box. The battery and the battery box in there. It's real tight on that side. But I didn't want to get rid of the factory 700 battery box because it was perfect. There's no rust, no rot, and it fits a little landscape battery perfectly. So getting the 3 and 4 is kind of tough even with the battery out. But this is what we're dealing with the plugs. It is time for them to go. So I just ran and grabbed some new NGKs. Gonna put those in. I had some Bosches in it originally, but I could get the NGKs today at a local parts store. So I'm gonna throw those in and see how it runs. It looks like they've been running real rich. So I'm not a carburetor guy. I'm not a carburetor expert or wizard or anything like that. So I might get the plugs done. I've got a new set of plug wires off the 1500 that I might put on this motor and just see how it runs. And maybe I'll dive into resetting the calibration on the 34 Pick 3 Solex that's in this. I've kind of watched some videos on how to reset the calibration between your bypass and your volume screws. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see if I dive into that in this episode or not. But the last thing I want to do is do plugs and wires in this and have it run okay for a while, but have it running rich the whole time and then ultimately fouling these plugs. So gonna get this thing sorted out, get it started, and we'll see where we're at from there. So I was fighting and fighting with this thing. It just wouldn't run right. It sounded like it was running on 2 cylinders. Well, I started inspecting everything. I noticed that the seal on the plenum on the passenger side was slid way down. And so I slid that back on to where it felt like it needed to be seated and tightened it up. And it's running fine now. I honestly think that was it. I think it was running with a massive vacuum leak because I didn't even notice that that rubber seal was pulled way off of the plenum. So fingers crossed that was it. And from here, it's just dialing in idle speed and maybe a slight air-fuel mixture. But now I'm going to try backing out of the shop and we'll see if it stays running. All right, so just as I was about to back it out of the shop, I put my foot on the clutch for the very first time, on the clutch pedal for the very first time, and it went right to the floor, basically. And I realized that I don't know if there's any differences in offsets in the pressure plate and clutches between these two motors, but I did realize, or I remembered rather, that we had done a brand new clutch on the 1500 when my dad and I built the 700. That clutch cable was dialed in for that clutch. In the 700, and not all my tin work is in yet, the adjuster for the clutch cable is right there, that big wing nut. Now we're gonna back it out of the shop and hopefully most of the grem ones are taken care of. It seems to be running okay. All right, well, I pulled it inside to just go over it once more before going down the road, and I think we're pretty much ready. But did not want to forget the most important part. 1, it's air-cooled. 2, it's a Beetle air-cooled motor. And 3, I just put the motor in and hooked everything up. So I am not betting that I did absolutely everything correctly. So to avoid from this car potentially burning to the ground, this one-of-a-kind car, I am bringing the most vital piece of equipment with me, just in case. And I've tried to make it a habit to put a fire extinguisher in every single car that I have, especially the air-cooled ones. So let's get loaded up and let's take this thing down the road. I am probably more nervous than I am excited. We'll see. I'm excited though. I am excited. Let's go. All right, guys, here we go. It starts great. Love to hear it. Got to bring the idle up a little bit. As you can tell, idle's real low. But let's see how she does on the road. Here we go, guys. We are entering the road with other vehicles. First through third felt real good. The road that my house is on is super bumpy. So, not gonna bang through the gears quite yet. right, guys. What better way to celebrate the first drive with the new motor than to go to Dunkin' Donuts and get a nice coffee. On a nice sunny day, no less. All right, so I went out back behind my local Walmart to basically film an ender to the episode. Somewhere that wasn't my driveway, somewhere quiet, where I could just kind of walk around the car and kind of finish up the episode and my thoughts on the car and the first drive, but it's a little methy back here. So I'm gonna drive back to the house and not take for granted the car running at the moment, since this is the shakedown first drive. So we're gonna head home and we'll kind of conclude this whole deal in the safety of my driveway. All right, guys. We're halfway through a successful first drive. I'd say 3/4 because I've got a Dunkin' iced coffee. All I gotta do is make it home. That is the rocker panel. Into my driveway now. Boy, oh boy, was that awesome. This could have gone horribly wrong and I could be walking home right now. Yes. Yes. Well, guys, that is the first drive with the 1600 done successfully. I mean, it is a cloud nine feeling. It really is. And I know that I'm talking this thing up right now, like a Beetle motor going in a car is probably the easiest motor swap you could ever do. That 1600 in that thing, I think, is gonna be super fun once I dial it in completely. I was pretty fearful that this episode would end not driving the car and having another can of worms of issues to kind of sort through, but I'm so stoked that we were able to drive this car without issue. And it feels good too, like under throttle, off throttle, between the gears, everything feels so good in this car. And I think after just a little bit of tweaking on that carburetor and dial it in a little bit, calibrate it, get the air fuel mixture in just right. I gotta bring the idle up a little bit. Well, that's it for this episode, guys. I'm gonna leave it here on a high note. Getting a chance to pull this thing back in my driveway and park it and air it out with no issues. I'm feeling so good about this. Thank you guys so much for all of the support and for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you guys think of the 700. I'm excited to kind of build this 1600 out a little bit more and get all the power I can out of it. We'll see you guys in the next episode.